Hi there, I'm Karen Kennedy from Real Food Matters, and today we're going to learn how to cook beans from scratch. So the beans that I have, I've actually already soaked, and I'm going to get these going for you before I talk a little bit more about this. Last night I soaked about 3 cups of pinto beans. You can see these big pinto beans here, but I also soaked them with about 2 cups of black beans. So you can see the mixture of these here. And of course the black beans have so much of that blue pigment in them that when you soak them, they turn every bean in there into something that's kind of purple. So that's what I've got here. And you want to soak your beans for at least 8 hours or overnight. And I know that you can do kind of a quick soak using like a pressure cooker, or you can just cook them for longer. But I encourage you to soak your beans, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. So once they're soaked, I always drain off the soaking water, give them a little rinse, and then I'm going to put them back in a pot and bring that to a boil. Alright, so I've got this burner on high, and I'm going to wait for it to come to a boil. Now, why do you want to soak them? There's a few reasons. Beans are a seed. Beans are a seed food. And, seeds are not meant to be eaten and digested by you. Seeds are designed, the purpose of seeds is to be consumed by a creature like us or some animal, and then to survive transit through our intestinal tract, and then be deposited in our poop somewhere else, right? So that's how they're designed. But what we can do is we can initiate the sprouting process by soaking them, just like we do if we're going to plant our seeds. And if we initiate the sprouting process, what we do is we start liberating some of the nutrients and breaking down some of the starches and proteins. So you might have heard at some point about anti-nutrients like phytates. And these phytates they're chelators, they're negatively charged chelators. And they bind up the minerals that are present in the seeds or the beans. The minerals like iron or zinc or copper or manganese, they're in there, but they're all bound up in a way that isn't bioavailable to us. We can't eat it unless we soak the beans. And the other thing about these beans is they have large starch molecules and proteins that also aren't really available for us to digest. They're hard to digest, but when you start germinating a seed, what happens is that when moisture gets in there, it starts the germination process of the seed, of the bean. It starts to free up those minerals, because those minerals are cofactors in enzymes. And that it also starts breaking down some of those starches into sugars and releasing some of those proteins so that they're available to the seed, so the seed can germinate and grow. Does that make sense? So you're just simulating that by soaking it. Yes, it does soften the bean, but that's why it softens the bean. So you know how beans have a reputation for sort of not being able to be digestible, and they make you fart a lot? Well, you can minimize that by soaking them, and there's a few other things that you can do and add to your beans that will improve their digestibility and increase the bioavailability of the nutrients that are in them. Okay? So soaking them is one thing that you're going to do. So I soak those, and if you can see in my pot here, can you see that there's kind of a foam forming on top? As that comes to a boil, that is going to get really foamy, and I want to skim that off. So that's what I'm waiting for. But the next thing I want to talk about is canned beans, and why you'd want to, if you've got, you can buy a case of these, why would you want to cook your own beans? There's a few reasons, but none of those reasons should dissuade you from keeping a few cases of canned beans in your cupboard, because this is great fast food. Yeah, if you haven't planned anything, I feel like we should always have a couple of pantry meals set aside for when we haven't been able to plan something, or we're in a hurry, life is getting busy. So keep these around. You can make quick black bean quesadillas. You can throw these in and make a really quick black bean soup with some chicken broth and some onions and cumin. So don't not stock these. I always think if you're an adult, you need to have beans in the cupboard. But a few things about why I prefer to cook my own beans. One, they taste better. They just taste better. You can cook them. Canned beans are usually made so they're very firm and they hold up in salads. Sometimes I want my beans to be really soft, and for that reason alone, cooking them is great. I can add seasonings to them, and and I'll show you how to make your beans taste better, so that broth is just super tasty. So that's another reason. But also, you know, when your beans get canned, they're canned in metal, and that metal is lined with a plasticizer. And you might know by now that those plasticizers, things like BPA, are hormone disruptors. And if you're exposed to a little bit of BPA now and then, your body can clear it and take care of it, and it might not cause you any problems with your hormone levels. But I like to avoid being exposed to a lot of it. And one way I do that is to minimize my use of canned foods until I'm in a hurry. So the way I do that is, you know, planning ahead. And also when I make beans, I make a lot of beans and I freeze them. And then I always have some, it makes my home cooked beans just as convenient as canned beans. Okay, so you can see that my pot is boiling, and while it's boiling, what I like to do is take my spoon and go around the edges and get some of this foam. See that foam? And I'm just going to lift that off. I mean, one thing this foam does, it'll boil over and make a mess. And if you're using your pressure cooker to cook beans, then you're going to want to go through the same process before you put your lid on and bring it to pressure. You're going to let your beans come to a boil, skim off this foam so it doesn't make a mess in your pressure cooker, and then you'll put the lid on and bring it up to pressure. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to turn this down. And the other thing, very important thing that I'm going to add is kombu, or sea kelp. And there's 3 reasons why I want you to add some of this. I've got a big piece here, and I don't think I need the whole thing. I'm going to add a piece about that big. Right. And you could rinse that off if you want, but you don't have to. I'll tell you why I like to use this. Those of you who watch my videos a lot know that I use seaweeds a lot in my cooking, a little bit frequently, little and often. And the reason I'm using kelp here is a few reasons. One, this kelp, this kombu, is very high in a substance called glutamic acid. Now, you might know, you might have heard of glutamic acid because of glutamate, and one very common food additive that acts as a flavor enhancer is monosodium glutamate, MSG. Well, it's that glutamic acid in there that hits that umami flavor sensor on our tongue, and really makes things taste rich and smoky, that umami flavor. So, so the glutamic acid in this it's also like in Parmesan cheese and bacon, and you know, you saute your onions, make them really nice, and they give that rich flavor to soups. They're in that, and hams, processed meats. But kombu is it. And you know, I discovered it when I went for a couple of years. I was eating a vegetarian diet, and I was making soups that I was really missing that great flavor that a ham bone or a ham hock gives to my bean soups. It gives it that smoky, rich umami flavor. It has a lot of glutamates in it. And then when I discovered kelp, I discovered that I could take my vegetarian or vegan soups and stews and give them that rich flavor. So that is what this is great for. And even though I eat an omnivore diet now, I don't miss an opportunity to add more flavor. And also the soup I'm going to make with this, I'm actually going to make a vegetarian chili. I might put meat in it. But even though I'm putting meat in it, this adds so much extra flavor. So one reason, glutamic acid adds a huge amount of flavor to this broth. It'll make whatever you make with these beans taste so much better. Reason number 2, it helps your beans break down and cook faster, and it makes them more digestible. So that's great for those of you who get a little windy when you eat your beans. The third reason, and that could stand on its own, is whenever you're adding sea vegetables to your food, you are going to be enhancing their nutritional content, because this kelp is very high in iodine, which is great for your thyroid, and it's high in other trace minerals that you just normally wouldn't get a lot of. So anything from the sea will have that. And I tend to buy my seaweeds from fairly reputable companies. This is Maine Coast Sea Vegetables. Eden also makes a pretty good product. So do your research on that. So I added that kelp. And that's it. And I've turned down the temperature, and I'm going to put the lid on. I'm going to let this simmer until it's done. If you are using a pressure cooker, this is when you would add, you'd put the lid on and bring it up to pressure. You can also, and I might do this after this video, I think I might add a little bit of cumin, because I know I'm going to use all these beans in a chili, and cumin is one of the main flavors, and it's a nice thing. I can just infuse this flavor of these beans with cumin. If I'm going to freeze these, I don't want to add any extra spices or flavors because I want them to be flexible. Now coming back to these canned beans, one thing I like about this Eden brand of canned beans is they also use kombu. When I look at the ingredients, it says organic black turtle beans, water, and kombu seaweed. So how cool is that? They don't add salt. Now, adding salt to your cooking beans is optional. I originally learned that you didn't want to use salt when you cook beans because it slowed down their cooking, but I found that isn't necessarily the truth. In fact, a lot of people will brine their beans. When you soak beans, you'll soak them with a lot of salt, and that helps them break down faster, and that's true. You know, similar to how you'd brine a turkey or a piece of meat, you could brine your beans as well. And I didn't do that with these. I don't always do that. But I mean, you know, like I do, I have a blog post on a white navy bean soup that you do with ham hocks. And you cook those beans with the ham hocks, and they turn out really creamy and wonderful. Those ham hocks have a ton of salt in them. So you can have salt in there. What you can't have in there is acid, like tomatoes. So if you're making a dish that has some canned tomatoes in there, don't cook your beans in there. You'll want to cook your beans separately, and that goes for lentils too. So lentils, you don't have to soak lentils ahead of time, but they won't soften up if you cook them with an acid. So you want to cook your beans separately, get your sauce and the rest of your soup going, and then add your cooked beans to it. What else did I want to say? Oh, so some of the beans that you buy in the store will have salt, and that's not good or bad. You just need to recognize it. So I know that these Eden beans aren't done with salt. They don't have salt in them, which means they need to be seasoned a little more heavily before I use them. But I bought this brand of garbanzo beans. I think I bought them at New Seasons, and they seem like a good product. Garbanzo beans, water, and sea salt. So they have salt. So when I use them, I need to remember them and adjust my recipe. If there's salt in my beans, I will often drain them out in a colander and give them a rinse so that the liquid that they're in doesn't get included in my dish and add extra salt that I don't want. Not that I don't like salt, but it's hard to factor that in with my recipe so it tastes right. Does that make sense? So salt is optional, but you have to factor it in. Don't use acid like tomatoes or vinegar in when you're cooking your beans. Do use kombu, sea kelp, when you're cooking your beans because it makes everything taste better with that umami flavor. It helps them become more digestible, and it adds iodine and trace minerals that your body needs that we don't get from our food all the time. So your beans will cook. It depends on how big they are. I'll check these in about 45 minutes to see how they're coming along. And then I'm going to make the rest of my chili this afternoon. Okay, so I hope this helps and gives you the confidence to go out and buy your beans dry and have them set aside for you, and you can cook them from scratch and make better tasting soups and chilies. Thanks for watching. Bye.